sidetracked there. We are in James, and we went to John last week, so we're doing some J's here. Can't figure out any more after John and James.
Joe.
Joe, yeah, Joe. Guess we'll go to Joe.
That's a joke.
What we did was we kind of shifted into the very practical, not just the day-to-day nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty kind of stuff. That really is where we need to be spending our time, not all kind of fancy theological foolishness about how many fairies or angels can dance on the head of a pin, but this is where it all really comes down to it. So when we went to 1 John, the whole book was written to combat the Gnostics. And the Gnostics were these people that thought they had this special knowledge. And they also thought that Jesus wasn't divine. So there's some of this business, and I'm going to sidebar here for just a minute. There's just a little bit of this business going on about the divine knowledge, the secret knowledge. Today, there are some people who claim to be prophets, and a prophet would be, by their definition, someone who has obtained all of the spiritual gifts. And they will proclaim that they heard a word from the Lord. Well, I take those people with a grain of salt, a dose of salt, if you will, because one of the more telling things that I recall about some of the secret knowledge was 2000 Y2K. And there were some weird things going on in Y2K, and some people wrote books about how you need to do all this before Y2K, and I'm wondering, why would you sell the book? Because you're not going to have time to spend the money.
Right.
But in particular, we were in a small group, and one of the people announced that we needed to buy a car that was prior to 1978. Why, you might ask? Well, that's when computer chips supposedly were introduced, and the computer chips are going to rot out and so forth and so on. And I said, well, my only thought to that is if you drove a car from 1978, you just soon walk, because there wasn't a car made in 1978 that was worth having. In particular, the Corvette Stingray, a car noted for its performance, was down to about 165 horsepower. Today's minivans would embarrass it. And this was, we bought a car in 78, and it said, do not park the car for any length of time over tall grass. The catalytic converter will burn it up. It'll catch the grass on fire. I mean, this was weird times, right? But there's a special knowledge. So anyway, we needed to buy all this. We need to capture all these things. We need to store up food. People were stockpiling. And it just so happened that a guy that I went to church with, he ran the power plant down at on Nicholson. And I asked him, I said, what you going to do if the computers kick off? And he said, we've been making electricity for a long time before we ever had computers. And we run simulations all the time, and if the computers crank out, in 5 minutes, we will have everything back. You'll have electricity. That's all I need to know. But there's something, because Y2K, there were a lot of people that got scared, right? They were hoarding food. They were hoarding water. And what this special knowledge tends to do is it tends to create fear and uncertainty. A lot of people today will claim that they hear a direct word from God, and then they tell you what you were supposed to do because God told them what you were supposed to do. I would be very cautious about that, because that's not the kind of knowledge that we really isn't knowledge in the first place. So there was a special knowledge, and John took that on head on, and he said in John 1, he said, you have an anointing from the Holy One, and all of you know the truth. So you know the difference between what's right and what's wrong. I do not write to you because you don't know the truth, because you know it, therefore you're informed. And because no lie comes from the truth. Who is the liar? Who is the liar? It is whoever denies that Jesus is the Christ. Such a person is the Antichrist. denying the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Whoever acknowledges the Son has the Father also. So he said, all this secret knowledge, you can throw that out the window. It's very clear. If you know the Father, you know the Son. If you know the Son, you know the Father. You can't deny that. If you deny that, you're the Antichrist. Or you oppose the message. You oppose the truth. You're a liar. So that's pretty strong language. And then he tells where love came from, and then he tells you how you know if you're demonstrating it. And he says this in 1 John 4. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. So if God loved us before, we love God. And Paul reinforces that, says, for while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. So, the whole notion of what is love, well, it's an atoning sacrifice for our sins, according to 1 John. And then he says, all right, so that's what love is. He says, how do we demonstrate it? And he says, 1 John 3:15, this is how we know what love is. Jesus laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down, that's the truth, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. That's the application. Now, and then he goes a little bit further, so he's not really saying, well, okay, you need to die, because he gives a very specific example. He says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister and has in need but has no pity, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. So it doesn't do very much good to just say, I'm going to pray for the person that's hungry. Why don't you cook them a meal? I mean, that's what John would kind of say, do something. So James, like John, is a very practical book. He's dealing with the matters of the day. And it can be summed up like this. If you act differently, then you get it. So this is what 1 John, James says. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. But there's practical advice. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. So now we start to get into a little bit of details. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So he's talking to people who basically fly off the handle. They get mad. And when they get mad, they say stupid things. And in fact, it says, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So you got to ask yourself, man, do I stay torqued up all the time? Am I twisted up about this or that? What is it that I just can't turn loose of? Because if you're in this chronic state of anger, then something's not right with you and God. It's just that simple. It says this, and then he goes into more practical application. Don't merely listen to the word and deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately can't remember what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom, perfect law, and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed. And then he gets a little bit more practical. Those who consider themselves religious and do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. So religion, if it's a proper religion, it's going to be something about it's going to be about the way you talk. And he says, but he started off and says, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And he talks all through James about the power of the tongue. It's amazing how I can talk to people. They can remember something that somebody said to them that damaged them 50 some odd, 60 some odd years ago, like it was yesterday. It doesn't leave their mind. It is like it's a brand. You know, you've been branded, you've been identified, and you have struggled with it. And that is two things. First of all, it's not understanding, or it's misapplying the scripture, because if someone calls you a Martian, you shouldn't go build a spaceship. Nor should you spend a lot of time on YouTube complaining about someone called you a Martian, you know. There's this sensitivity that we have that's really sometimes overstated. You need to grow a little bit of a thick skin. You need to be comfortable in your own skin. You need to be able to withstand criticism and do it in a way that is gracious and humble. Those who consider themselves religious but don't keep their tight rein on their tongues are deceiving themselves. They're a liar, and their religion is worthless. Why? Because when you go out and you're talking to the person next to you and you're talking about your religion, but then at the same time you're talking about that person, you can't put the two together. You're not a witness. You're just not. Your religion is worthless. Religion that God accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Does that sound like John 3:15? If you find someone in need and you won't feed them, how can the love of God be in you? Where is someone likely to be in need? An orphan and a widow. Funerals are funny things. A bunch of people show up, everybody squeezes and hugs the person, and then 2 days later, the person's sitting there in absolute isolation trying to figure out there's no one in this bed that's been there for 50 years. But we've done our part, right? Hey, I brought the casserole. I kissed them on the cheek. And we don't realize the support system that it takes in many cases to deal with that. And so we're kind of all alone, you know, and that's the rule rather than the exception, I'm afraid, because one of the beautiful things, a gentleman some of you may know, Tom Green. Tom had 10,000 friends. Tom had been a state representative over on the West Bank over in Maringouin, that area, and then he ran for governor, and just outgoing, but Tom had a very large family. Well, when Tom passed away, he had huge amounts of people that showed up at his funeral. But about 3 weeks later, I sent a note to one of his sons, and I said, I'm just checking in on you because I know you got a large family and so forth and so on. But I just wanted to see if there was anything I could do. And he sent back and he said, you have no idea how powerful that is. He said, because our family has been, and it's a big family and it's a strong family. He said they've been rallying around mom and that kind of thing. But they said, you know, just hearing that from someone like you makes all the difference in the world. When you know, how do you know when you're in the right place? When somebody picks up their phone and they say, help. I'm screwed up. I am absolutely at my wit's end. Because there's a certain law, you know, there's a line you just don't cross. You just don't let people in. You just don't call somebody up and say, I am so lonely my bones ache. You know, I'm scared to death. I'm going to have to do everything differently now. And they suffer in silence, but I brought the casserole. Well, being able to reach out and say, look, now, does that mean that you're going to show up at their door and say, I'm here to help whether you like it or not? No. But it does mean this, a sincere, I'm here anytime that you need me. All it takes is one phone call. And then you got to mean it, because that's the difference. That's orphans and widows, isn't it? And that's exactly. And orphans and widows shouldn't be read to mean, well, that's just orphans and widows. The general application is somebody that's in need. So don't get angry, number one. Don't be bitter, number two. And number three, look for somebody to help. Because the more you help somebody, the less likely you are to be bitter. So here's practical advice 101. Number one, listen. My dear brothers and sisters, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Do not let your mouth overload your rear end. If you had a nickel for every time you got in trouble because you didn't listen, you spoke impulsively, you weren't slow to speak, you immediately. And your temper is almost sure to follow, because what that suggests is that I don't want to hear what you've got to say. I'm about to tell you the way it really is. Well, if you had a nickel for that, you and me both would probably have a nice retirement home in Italy. somewhere overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. So the first advice is saying, listen, and then he says, number 2, right behind that, control your temper. Because to listen is self-control. Control your temper is even more self-control. Because when you're mad, you do not listen. And you are definitely not slow to speak. Now, this is a balance, because in today's world, we are way too sensitive. I mean, we call them snowflakes, and that probably offends some people that are sensitive, right? I mean, it's to that point where we say things and we can't laugh at ourselves and we can't take ourselves not so seriously. Everything has to be some kind of event. We get upset by anyone and anything, but when we do this, we are not in control. The person that is controlling you is the person that is yanking your chain. We kind of get like a bee in a beer can, just buzzing around, just aggravated by everything that's going on. We react to their words, and typically we overreact. Oh, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said to me, I was going to tell them. Well, you didn't. And so what you're doing now is you're replaying something that happened an hour ago, a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, and nothing's going to change. The past is undefeated. Absolutely. You can revisit it and revisit it and revisit it and revisit it, but you won't change it. Often, though, what it'll do is by revisiting and revisiting and revisiting, it will change you, because you get more guilty. You get more, oh, God, how can I be so stupid? Self-defeating. And the fact of the matter is, you lose. And when you do that, a little bit of yourself is kind of eaten away. It doesn't come back. I'm mad, you know. And that's supposed to leave you with a wide, because I'm mad, I got a wide path of destruction. I can destroy anything that I want to. I can mess up what I can all I can get, and I can screw up the rest. That's what it's all about, isn't it? And then anger is a narcissist. It is entirely internal. Now there's righteous anger, that's a different, but the anger we're talking about is this anger where you're, instead of being slow to anger, you're quick, you're fly off the handle. The renowned theologian Ray Stevens said it this way: walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes. Now that's different words, but that's exactly the same sentiment that James comes up with. Those who consider themselves religious and do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. In other words, you abuse, criticize, and accuse with your words, and your religion is worthless. You want to be useful? You want your religion to bring somebody to God instead of your religion being accusatory? You want to be someone that doesn't show up at a funeral for a person and hold up a sign that says, Jesus hates homosexuals? You know, that church, whatever, the particular church.
Westbury Baptist.
Well, yeah. And thought that this was somehow Christian. Walk a mile in my shoes. Practical advice 102, anger does not produce righteousness. Anger, you've heard, there is righteous anger, but James isn't talking about that. He's talking about selfish anger. It does not, like John describes, love one another. Anger is the opposite of that. Love is an action. You're sensitive to what the other person needs, and you're maybe even ahead of the game. Hey, that person is going to need this. I know it. They lost their spouse. They are going to need this. We're going to just show up at their house in a week and bring some food and just tell them, if there's here's the food, and if there's anything else you can do, because there's a sensitivity to meeting the needs. On the other hand, anger is a blowtorch. It doesn't have any clue what's going on, and quite frankly, it doesn't care. It just scorches indiscriminately anything it touches. Angry people are hard to be around all the time. I mean, people that are chronically angry, you tend to avoid, because they're going to find some fault in you, or they're going to complain about something, or there's something that's just not right with the world. James goes on, do not merely listen to the word and deceive yourself. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says, do what it says, do what it says. It's like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Oh, perfect law. What is this perfect law? He's nice. He's going to tell you. This isn't a roll up your sleeves and do it right. This is a blueprint. The difference is between, James says this, show me your works, I'll show you your faith. But he also says, in the middle of it, he says, be self-controlled and be ready to be persecution, because persecution creates perseverance. So what does he mean? Show me your works, I'll show you your faith. Well, here's the way it goes. James says, okay, you're saved. Now that you have God, do what you're supposed to do. This creates works. The legalist says, do what I'm supposed to do. Show up to God and say, where's my money? Where's my prize? The works are a result of faith in one case. The works are a result of self in another case. Those works are dead. They're dead works. But if you have no works, James is absolutely right. Where is your faith? So it's a blueprint. It's sort of like diffusing a bomb. You read it and ignore it, you'd be correctly labeled a fool. Big red, black, 48 font. Do not cut the red wire. What you fixing to do? I thought I'd snip that thing and just see what the heck happened. Bam. That's not following the directions. And James says if you follow the directions, then you will be like the royal law that gives freedom. All right, so we're seeing some really weird things. We're kind of skipping Thanksgiving. You know, some people are skipping because one person voted for a relative and you can't talk about that at the table, so we just won't go see the person. We just won't. No can do. Some really bizarre stuff. Women shaved their head and demanded no contact from the husband, all the while stockpiling birth control. Which begs the question, why would you stockpile birth control if you're not going to contact your husband? It's a biological question, I guess. We have elevated our feelings to a dangerous level of priority. Our feelings. I feel, I want. As opposed to saying I'm anchored and my feelings need to change. We constantly tell people, change the way I feel, which makes me dependent upon you, which means if I can change the way you feel, I can change it for the good or I can change it for the bad. I feel like a woman, no problem. You just can't, in today's world, you can't use the same bathroom. That's been up for debate until recently. Well, what if you feel like a UPS driver? Get the brown truck. Give them a truck. I mean, it's a deal where we have become ourselves. Now, the thing about this is that if your feelings trump the facts, and by the way, I heard a guy the other day, this was actually a politician say, it is biologically impossible to differentiate between a male and a female. And it's like, now that's feelings. Because it's sure not facts, right? He's saying the only difference is that sociologically, you know, it's the gender expectations that hold them back. Really, well, go find 5 women and play the Boston Celtics. You can pick any 5. I'll give you the whole world, and come back and tell me how that came out. It's a different thing. Those are facts, right? But if you're your own judge, your feelings out-trump facts, then you can decide what is right and wrong, and that makes you God. And since you're God, you're absolutely justified to lash out at righteous indignation at whatever happens to challenge you. If you challenge my worldview, you're a bigot. You're not factual, you're a bigot. If you do something, you're intolerant. So these kinds of things are coming about. James would say that you're not following the royal law of freedom at all. We're in the midst, at the moment of a challenging time. 2,000 years ago, James was in very challenging times because he was telling his people, hey, watch your mouth. Watch what you say. Don't get angry. Walk the walk, and then let that do your talking for you. This is what James said. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete. How many of you feel joy when you have your faith tested? Yes, no. And I think what he's saying there is, but when you get to the other side, when you get past the event, you can look back on the event, you can say that made me stronger. And you got to be willing to face the trial. You got to be able to walk through the valley of the shadow of death if you're going to fear no evil. So you have to confront your demons, if it were, as it were. Today, more than any, man, we are in an uncivil society. Good grief. All you got to do is post something on the internet, and 3 seconds later, there's an anonymous post that devolves into an absolute undressing, an uncivil undressing of whatever the position is you took. But what does it matter? We're in a society that demands immediate gratification. The students at the LSU game decide that it would be proper form to scream fire Brian Kelly because they had to punt the first time they got the ball. This is bizarre. This is uncivil. This is selfish. This is not mature. Now, the other side of that is, if we want to talk about maturity, I guess we could say in passing, exactly why do we pay somebody $9 million a year to say, find ball, get ball? It's not that complicated, you know. That's another story. But I think that says something about our misguided principles as well, doesn't it? I have to say another aside. I lost a lot of interest in college athletics when it decided that they would pay him $10 million not to sign with one team and go to another team. I lost a lot of interest when a guy showed up at a signing deal and he shows up in a Lamborghini. This is such a misplaced priorities. And the fact of the matter is, man cannot serve two masters. Choose you this day who you will serve. Because man can't serve God and mammon. If you have money, the money should be going to help other people. It's just that simple. If you have money and you're trying to just accumulate at these outrageous levels, and this is something I wrestle with every day, because after a career of working fairly hard, I've managed to be in a place that I'm not as challenged as maybe a lot of people. And for that, I am eternally grateful. And I think I will be able to leave my family in a little better position than where I found myself when I started. But that's something we all wrestle with, right? How much is enough? I mean, do you need the $90,000 bathroom renovation? I don't know. There was one of the preachers on TV. Come to find out, she had spent over $20,000 on a toilet. I'd like to see this dude, not in action, but just as a picture, maybe. But not anyway. I really digress. But James, like John, doesn't stutter. We're back to the royal law. Here's the key. If you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, and you go, all right, James, for goodness sakes, I don't know what the royal law is. Love your neighbor as yourself. The royal law. What does he mean by that? He differentiates it from the rest of the law. He says everything else, okay, that's fine. But the royal law, the law that we put the crown on, the one that allows you to say, okay, I really understand. Here it is. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. Oh, okay. But if you show favoritism, that's not where I thought he was going with that. You sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. We used to hold this meeting in a place where occasionally someone would show up that more people knew him than didn't know him. And some people would show up not for the service, but for the opportunity to perhaps see the person that other people didn't have the ability to see. Or at another church, the LSU football coach walked in, and you couldn't get down the hall because everybody's got to square up with I'm a little bit of that. If you cannot speak to the custodian with the same degree of respect that you would speak to the CEO, you have sinned. And that is something where we really, the royal law is big time. It is not, it's not love others as yourself. No. Because he goes to favoritism. Why? Because that's probably one of the places where we violate the royal law more than anything. We pick and choose. Take a selfie. Nobody takes a selfie with the janitor. But lots of people take it with the CEO because, hey, I'm next to the man. Therefore, that makes me the man, or at least pretty close to the man. For whoever keeps the whole law and stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. And he just said that right after favoritism. For he who said, you shall not commit adultery, also said, you shall not murder. If you do not commit adultery but commit murder, you have become a lawbreaker. And if you do not keep the royal, and notice he says not if you keep, if you really keep, you are doing right. Very simple. How do you know if you're doing right? Love your neighbor. And we already went through 1 John about what love is. Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because freedom without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. How in the world does the law bring freedom? Okay, we've got two things here. Imagine yourself, first of all, mad all the time, axe to grind, constantly bothered by what somebody did or said, constantly complaining about what somebody did or said, constantly telling other people about what they did or said. You are torqued up. Can't stop. That's one person. Or the person who's following the royal law, who sees their neighbor in need and helps them, who doesn't show favoritism, who thinks everybody's made in the image of God, every person is just as valuable as every other person, and goes out of their way to demonstrate this to people to show respect, and by so doing to show respect that that person knows then I'm of worth and I'm of value. And when called to volunteer, perhaps you don't say, well, where am I going to volunteer? It's what do you need? Now, those two people, the one that is continually, always, something outside of me is causing me to do something, or something inside of me is causing me to do something for others. Who's freer? That's pretty easy. Because if you're always tarked up, if you're always jacked up, if you're always mad, how hard is it going to be to make you mad? Heck, half the time I can make you mad and didn't even know I did anything. And then if you're like everybody else, 50 years later, you're still what? Mad. One of the most amazing things I ever saw was I was sitting down talking to a new group of faculty as at a new school. And this lady was talking about and she was just on one. I mean, it's like, whoa, man, take a pill. And she's on this rant about, there's no discipline, there's no this, there's no that. And it's the first time I ever met her. And I was like, well, when did this happen? Because she was, you ready? 7 years ago. It's like, wow, you're a goofball. You're a fool. You are absolutely living in the past, consumed by the past, judging everything that happens now by the past. It's just amazing. Was she free? Man, she was on a leash about that long that could be tightened up at any time by anybody. On the other hand, if you're the person that is at peace with your neighbor, when they say something kind, when they say something that just is intended to anger you, let me slow down. Just what exactly does that criticism change? And it's like, it's not really that important. As junior high kids get this sometimes, if they call you a Martian, don't go build a spaceship. Just let it be. Let it be. But man, if you can't, then you're not free. So the royal law creates freedom. Love your neighbor creates freedom. You're less likely to gossip. You're less likely to slander. You're less likely to get angry. You're less likely to speak in haste. You're less likely to stroke out. You're much more likely to sympathize. And to remember, I do know what it feels like to walk a mile in their shoes. Love your neighbor. The royal law. How do you know what love is? John tells you, helping a brother or sister in need. And then all the time being merciful. Because mercy does not come to the person you buddy up to the guy who can give you some street cred, but you bulldoze the little guy because you have more lead in your pencil than he does. This is about who I am. When I walk in that door, I demand respect. When I come to dinner, I expect to sit at the table of honor. Mercy is not to show favoritism. Mercy is given to people who show mercy, who follow the royal law. What's one of the greatest feelings you've ever had? Inevitably, it was when you were given mercy. Oh my gosh, I have absolutely screwed up. It's okay. And it says mercy will not be extended to those who don't follow the royal law, because they're always being unmerciful. So this is, James is like Dr. Phil on steroids. He just simple, practical. Don't do that. And we're going to go next week to talk about the tongue, because that's where he really drills down into it and says, it all starts there. Man, if we can just tame that sucker, we got it whipped. Well, taming that thing is not easy, because we've been at it for a while and it's still running wild. But I can just think in just recent memory, man, nothing spreads faster than a rumor in the church. That's like cats on crack in a thunderstorm. Man, gone. Where'd they go? I don't know. Did you hear? Well, I'm not sure, but Then we say whatever it was we heard, and we do what? Add a little more. By the time we get through, it's an axe murderer. In church, James says the tongue, who can tame the tongue? So that's the last piece of practical advice. That's like 104. You can really start paying attention to what comes out of your mouth as to what's in your heart. It's really about favoritism. It's really about the ability to see the person that's in need. And not get so wound up that you're not even recognizable. And let me tell you one thing. You will have multiple opportunities this week to practice that. As Justin would say, I guarantee.
Another big philosopher.
That's true. So this isn't secret knowledge like the Gnostics, where they were sitting around gazing at their navels thinking that they could say something and everybody would go, whoa, I've never heard that before. Let me follow them. This isn't secret knowledge where somebody says, ooh, Y2K, it's going to shut everything down. God told me. God, no, it's not. It's real simple, direct. What are you doing? Who are you doing it to? And how often do you do it? That, my friends, is what James is all about. So we'll look at the tongue next week and we'll move from there. Father, we thank you. Well, we thank you for the word. We readily acknowledge we don't follow it most of the time. Far too often we find ourselves in petty disputes, silly arguments that escalate into big arguments that culminate in a complete rift where we won't even go sit down at a Thanksgiving dinner because we can't stand to be in the presence of the person next to us. So ungodly. May we embrace your advice. May we embrace James's words, simple words, plain words, and apply them. In remembering the royal law, love your neighbor. It's the least we could do for a person who died for us.